Hi, this is Patsy with a Z. Welcome to Joy on Paper Live, a program for writers and those who dream of writing, and for everyone who wants to know the story behind the book. And oh boy, we have a very exciting book today, and I'm so happy to welcome Brad Parks to Joy on Paper Live because now I can see him. We've been on the radio, but it's so much nicer to be able to see you. How are you, Brad?
So you're the first person in history who's ever been that glad to see me, but I appreciate it all the same.
I'm always glad to see you. I always remember there's a book that has stayed in my mind. I love all your books, but the one that was from 2018, I think just before the pandemic or when we were heading into it, and the what's it's
Closer than
closer than
yes.
close. I love that book so much. Melanie, right? The girl's name was Melanie.
Lee Barrick, very good. Wow,
Isn't that
you are
good?
dredging that out of the memory banks.
Yes, I am because I remember it, and I remember then we missed a few years there. I think where the pandemic. I don't remember. It's like a blur that pandemic year.
We try to forget the pandemic. Yes, Patsy.
That's right. And but oh, I always I whenever something on the news comes up about social workers and stuff like that, I remember Melanie. I just remember it. It's I think at the time that year I wasn't I think by the end of 2018 we were all so confused. I didn't have like my favorite books of the year. I didn't have a program for it. I don't remember anything. Um, but this definitely your new book, The Boundaries We Cross, is so good. It is, I can tell you, there you got it. And it is so good. It is going to be in the top five of the books that I've read this year that I just love. So I just
Patsy,
wanted you to know that. And of
very
course,
much appreciate that. I know you are one of the best readers in the world. I would wonder how many people have read more books than you, Patsy, and it's probably not a very large number. So when you like something that much, it warms my heart. Thank you very
well,
much.
I've met a few in England, actually, in Oxford. I keep getting more, so I keep busy. But I want to show I'm not the only one who thinks that you're brilliant. The cover is very intriguing, and we'll come back to that. I like it because it looks like we're looking through a gate, and it's a little ominous, and we see this lovely school, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. But I just want to show this very exciting thing that's happened today. My goodness.
That,
Bravo.
huh? Editor's pick. There it is.
Isn't that nice?
Oh, wow. Even the burst of applause. No, that's enough. That's enough. Settle down. Settle down.
You're going to
I
get a
think that
big head. But by the time you finish this interview, you're going to have a bigger head.
I know. It's the first time editors have ever liked me for anything, Patsy, so I'm very pleased to have it.
And I was so happy to hear it because you deserve it for so many of your books. But this is spectacular. And so I was so happy that you got this and we got to hear about it today. And I got to put it on my program because I don't get a lot of breaking news, but this is breaking news today, right?
Yeah, this just happened. This rolled in on my email about an hour ago, so it's all fresh, and I still have the new car smell about it.
Oh, this is definitely breaking news for me. Oh, I love it. I love it. But now let's go back to this cover because, as I said, it's very evocative. Because we know that there's a deep story in here. And I love what Riley Sager said. She says, "The boundaries we cross is a full throttle page turner, starts at a sprint and doesn't let up until the shocking conclusion." And she is right. I recognized it right away. I'm glad that the editors recognized it because it's a great book.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Patsy. And yeah, Riley is one of my favorite authors. So to have those words was deeply, deeply flattering to me. So yes, the boundaries we cross, as you can see through that little gate, whatever it is set at a boarding school. Which, and for those who are not familiar with the plot, it features Charles Bliss, who is an English teacher and a creative writing teacher at a very high-powered Connecticut boarding school, and he is accused of having an inappropriate relationship with a student. Now, he claims he did not do it, but when that student, a young woman named Haley Goodlow, disappears, Charles becomes the only suspect and becomes in a desperate chase to clear his name. So it is definitely a very tense book. Everybody I've talked to who's read it said they just couldn't put it down, and that included the reviewer at Publishers Weekly said they couldn't put it down. So if I've managed to fool Publishers Weekly, things must be going fairly well for me.
No, no, this is definitely one of those can't put it down books, or one that you shouldn't start reading unless you've already done all the laundry and done all the cooking, and because otherwise you're going to ignore it all, because who cares when you're reading a book like this? It is so
I
good.
live to distract people from their laundry, Patsy. That's like my main goal in
Well,
life.
that's you definitely do. And the thing is, what I love about it, I've mentioned to you before, I think, but I love books about private schools. My dream when I was about 8 years old, I was going to stow away on a ship, go to England, and when I got there, I was going to walk to Eton, and I was going to pretend I was a boy. Um, as I got a little older, that would have been impossible, but at that time, that was my dream.
Boarding school really it makes for a great setting for a book like this because and I should full disclosure my wife has worked at boarding schools for close to 20 years now. This is familiar to me as a setting. Our children were basically raised on the campus of a boarding school, and what's great to me about boarding schools is the students never leave. There's this thing at boarding schools called the triple threat. So a teacher at a boarding school has to be, teaching during the day, they're probably coaching in the afternoon, and then they're doing dorm duty at night. So they are just around these kids 24/7, and it forces everybody into close proximity, and it makes them the relationships very intense, and they're also surrounded by it all the time. So for Charles, when he has this massive trouble at his workplace, it's really not just his workplace, right? It's his life. These are the only people, the fellow teachers are his community. And so when this accusation comes out, there's no escape from it for him. He even lives on campus at the boarding school. So of course, the first thing the school does is kick him off campus. So there's nothing like making your protagonist homeless in about chapter 3, which is I think what happens to poor Charles in this book. But I
Exactly.
love that boarding school setting because it really raises the stakes for everyone involved.
The atmosphere of school like that, and you create it so well. And one of the wonderful things about this book, I like that you're innovative. This book has a really lovely way that you've written it in a different way. It's new. It's just new. You've got what
Right,
we call a midlog. Explain how you decided to do that. We have, of course, Haley, who is the
right.
young student, and then she's writing a log actually herself. And so, how did you come out with this idea for the point of view?
Right. Yeah. So Charles Bliss is, in addition to being a creative writing teacher, he's also a writer himself. He's a bit of a failed author. He had one book that came out, and it was a spectacular flop. It sold almost no copies. But as an author, he's aware of the tricks that authors will pull, and so he knows that a prologue is something that happens before the plot of the book. And if an author wants to be able to tell something to a reader, they can write a prologue, and then the epilogue is, of course, after the action of a book. But he's sitting here saying, "What if I want to be able to talk to a reader in the middle of a book?" And so that becomes the midlog, which Charles, I guess, invents for purposes of this book. And structurally, it was a fun book for me because you basically had 2 points of view in this book. One is Charles Bliss, the teacher who has been accused of this horrible thing, and that action starts in January of the school year. But the other voice is Haley Goodlow, the student he is accused of having this inappropriate relationship with, who then disappears. And the action of that point of view starts in September at the beginning of the school year. So you have these 2 points of view shifting back and forth in two different timelines, but of course they weave together and overlap and intersect in all sorts of wonderful and delightful ways. So it's a little bit of a brain teaser to read, of course, and to write. It sometimes made my head explode a little bit, but hopefully it's like fun as you're getting different details from different times and seeing how they all weave together. And these are things that keep the pages turning, which is the main point, Patsy.
Exactly, and that's exactly why I liked it. I like a little something a little different, something not expected, and it works beautifully. Everybody's going. Unfortunately, I think a lot of people are going to be doing it, but it was clever. It was a smart way to handle this problem, because it is difficult to have to explain things to the reader in a way just when you have these two points of view. So now we have something extra, and I liked it. I liked it. And
Well, it was fun for me. I was at one point kind of writing in the voice of a teenage girl. And so what I did, I did some research. Now, as a middle-aged balding man with a beard, I have to be careful about how I do my research. But I would just hang out in the dining hall or around the school. I have teenage children as well, so it's not maybe that weird for dad to be hanging out at school. But I would be hanging out at school and just listening to the kids talk. And what really struck me is I think that the trap that sometimes authors will get into is, okay, I have to write like a young person. So I'm going to stuff it full of kind of young person jargon and make it sound hip and current. And actually, what I discovered when I listened very carefully is teenagers talk a lot like we do. The language has not changed that much in the 30 years since I was a teenager or more than that. The one thing I noticed is that for teenagers, everything is so immediate and so vivid because everything that is happening to them has never happened before. And so it's just the energy and the excitement they have about things is actually what I had to capture and find ways to express. But it was a fun thing for me just to be that fly on the wall and listening to the teenagers talk and then trying to represent that accurately in the manuscript.
I think you make Haley very real, and we really get into the school. Of course, now I understand why you wrote so well about the school and really take us there. The environment of school is so different, and that part I just loved. I loved. I was like for a little while I was in school, so I love that.
I think it's one of the things I did like about this book is it is relatable in a couple of ways. One, we've all been to school. We've all, even public school kids like me, imagine what life at a boarding school would be like. So that's something that's relatable. The other thing to me that's relatable about this plot, and this was really one of the first things that drew me to this story, is the false accusation. Patsy, I think we have all been wrongly accused of something in our lives, right? Even if we have led relatively boring lives. Now, it doesn't have to be as big as what Charles is accused of. He's accused of having this relationship with a student and then of kidnapping, of murder, perhaps, all these. But sometimes it's just, did you eat the last cookie? Did you forget to do your dishes? And you say, no, I didn't eat the last cookie. It was somebody else. You absolutely are the person who ate the last cookie. And even that can feel like a lot sometimes because we get accused of something that we know we didn't do. But then when you can't prove it, that is a really difficult thing. And that's what Charles, with obviously greater stakes than did you eat the last cookie, is faced with here is can he prove his innocence when he knows he did not do what he was accused of? And of course, it can be a very difficult thing. I don't know if you ever listened to the famous podcast Serial. But this is about a young man who's accused of murder that he claims he did not commit. Adnan is his name. And one of the reasons Adnan has a tough time clearing his name is because he's being asked, what did you do at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on January 13th? And to him, January 13th was not a day he committed murder. It was not a day that anything particularly unusual happened. It was just another day. And so it becomes very hard for a truly innocent person to clear his name. And that's the dilemma that Charles Bliss is faced with in this novel.
And what a great name. I love hearing you say Charles Bliss. I thought this is so perfect. It has a slightly British feel to it, which I think helps with the environment. Bliss is a name that you might hear in England. And Charles too. Charles Bliss. Perfect name.
Although, of course, Charles Bliss's background, and I don't even know where do characters wander into our heads? I don't even know. But part of his backstory is that he is not some gilded child from some upper crust family. He's actually from down east Maine, which is all the way up past Bar Harbor, where they drop their eyes and I can't even do a Maine accent very well. But he's this kid from a very poor family who won an essay contest to get him entry into this world and then later went on to Yale and did very well for himself. But he's always a little bit of a fish out of water at this elite boarding school where he teaches. And that's one of the things I just love about Charles. And actually, one of my favorite characters in the novel is Robbie Bliss, who is Charles's mother. And Robbie is this woman who's described as being tough as barnacles, and she is from down east Maine, and she cleans houses for a living. So she is somebody who is very distrustful of this world that her son is in, this world of wealthy, powerful people, the kind of people that a that a Robbie Bliss just inherently does not trust because they are rich, they are powerful, they're the kind of people who have looked down their noses that whole life, and she doesn't like them. So the moment she sees her son getting in trouble in this world, it's this very difficult thing that she has to grapple with. And of course, all along, she's telling Charles, you can't trust them, Charles. You can't trust any of them. And that's just one more thing that, of course, makes us realize what a tough situation Charles is in as this book continues.
Also, because you've given Haley a backstory that is so compelling. She's not just another student. She's got a
Right.
major backstory. So how did you decide on that? That's it's like a crazy idea. All of this, why she's important, why she's
Well,
not
yeah,
just another
I
kid in
can't
the
have
school.
Charles being accused of kidnapping and murdering just anyone, Patsy. That would be
Yeah.
boring. Let's face it, this is plausible. The students at these schools often come from these high-powered families, and that is the case with Haley Goodloe. Her mother is an influential state senator in Connecticut. Her father is the former governor of Connecticut. So when Haley Goodloe goes missing, and of course her family is very wealthy and well resourced, it's big news when the granddaughter of a former governor goes missing. And that's just another thing to increase the difficulty and raise the stakes on Charles. And it also makes it where he's just this poor kid from Maine. So he suddenly has all of these forces aligned against him, all of them saying, you're the bad guy, you're guilty, and you're going to prison. And yeah, I don't make it easy in this book
No,
for
you
Charles,
don't,
do
because
I?
I
I mean,
mean,
I
if he
feel
came
bad for the
from
guy.
a law family, then he'd have a lawyer in his back pocket. So he has to navigate all of these things, and it's just I give this poor guy a lot of problems.
I'm a big believer in what I call the anti-Hippocratic oath for authors. So the Hippocratic oath for doctors is do no harm. The anti-Hippocratic oath for authors is do lots of harm. And that's basically what I do to Charles in this book.
You definitely do, and it's funny because this is one of those subjects that's very au courant. Everybody hears about, it's like on the news, this and that all the time, and going back all the way to the days of Charlotte Bronte, she wrote her first book that was rejected and wasn't published until after she passed away, was called The Professor. And in that, there we have a professor also teaching in a girls' school where most of the girls come from very important families. And right away, he realizes, and he wants to keep that distance. He wants to make sure that they respect him. He'll respect them as long as they behave and don't step out of line. And as a matter of fact, at one point, when two of the girls are really flirting with him outrageously, he just let them know that they can't get away with that. He had his boundaries, and he didn't want any problems.
Yeah. Which is the inspiration for the title of this novel, The Boundaries We Cross, because Charles begins the novel by explaining that he has these boundaries with students that he has developed over his 10 or 11 years of teaching, where he knows he has to have a good relationship with these students if he's ever going to reach them as a teacher, but there are lines you cannot cross. So for example, he insists that all the students call him Mr. Bliss, not Mr. B, not any cutesy little nickname. No, he is Mr. Bliss. And he starts every class the same way. He holds out his hand and he shakes each student's hand as they come in and he says, "Hi, I'm Mr. Bliss." And each student is expected to introduce themselves. And this is actually a little ritual that I ripped off from a teacher buddy of mine who actually does this every single morning. And I just thought it was this beautiful thing because it's this reminder to students that yesterday doesn't matter. So whether you were a star student yesterday or whether you got in trouble, that is now in the past, and it's all about today and what can we learn today and can you make yourself better as a student and as a person today. And I just love that. So when I heard about that, I had Charles rip it off. But yeah, he is very much structured. He has learned his lesson about not getting too close to students. And it's another one of these things that make you say, okay, so when he is accused of having this inappropriate relationship, and let's be like honest, real honest, Patsy. As Me Too burgeoned out, and we know the statistics. There was a very well reputable study that showed that something like 92% of women when they accuse a man of doing this something he shouldn't have done, they're telling the truth 92% of the time, right? So we should therefore believe women, except there still is that 8%. And does Charles, in fact, live in this 8%? Is he, in fact, as much as there's always going to be the rush to judgment, when you hear a teacher has been accused of having a relationship with a student, you say, yeah, he probably did. Maybe, but maybe there's this 8% chance that he didn't. And that's a lot of the push and pull in this novel of did he or didn't he?
Yeah, which is why you're editor's choice because you're an editor's pick on Amazon because I think a lot of people will they'll start the book with that same attitude. One of the things you had to build up the storyline to also include the administrators in the school and how you created them is important because as you said by chapter 3 he's out of there.
And this is where it is fortunate that my wife has worked for boarding schools for so many years, because literally my first phone call when I started researching this book was to the head of school at the school where my kids basically grew up. And he's a dear friend of mine. His name is Jeb Byers. I don't mind dropping his name. A wonderful man. The prototype of the silver haired head of school, very wise, very lovely man. And I asked him, I said, okay, Jeb, so here's the scenario. What would you do? So I was very much playing. And then as soon as he started talking, I started scribbling notes down madly of, okay, this and this. So hopefully it all rings true, because for as much as this is a quandary for Charles, he's been accused of this thing he says he hasn't done. It's a big deal at a school too. The last thing you want as a school is word getting out that one of your teachers has been taking liberties with a student. This is the kind of thing, these schools protect their reputations fiercely. And that is the kind of thing, let's face it, that makes parents say, I'm not sending my child to this school where they have these kind of problems. And the moment that starts happening, things can slide very downhill very quickly for a school, because ultimately schools are businesses. And even the well-to-do boarding schools, they rely on butts in the seats. And if parents stop sending the children their way, pretty much any school is going to be in trouble in a hurry. So hopefully you get a sense of their sense of alarm as well. In okay, how do we deal with this situation? And of course, they just want him gone sooner rather than later. So that is yet another thing that increases the stakes and increases the tension, and hopefully keeps you reading past the time when you're supposed to be doing your laundry, Patsy.
It did. It did. So the when you started this book, what was the catalyst? Did you have the idea and then you came out with Mr. Bliss, or did you have Mr. Bliss in your head somewhere? Isn't it wonderful how
So
these things come to our minds?
yeah, and it's funny because a lot of times I can't even tell you where a book began, but in this case, I do know. It was actually. Do you remember like the first week of the pandemic? I call it week zero, because at the very beginning of the pandemic, like that week, that Monday, we still didn't know anything was happening, right? Like there was this thing called the coronavirus. I went back and looked it up. It was literally on page A8 of the New York Times. So it was not headline news. It was something that Italian tourists on cruise ships were worried about, but it was not on anybody's radar in America. And by Friday of that week, everything was starting to shut down. But Monday of that week, someone I love, and I don't want to get into the details, accused me of doing something that I knew I hadn't done, and I couldn't prove it. So it was the false accusation, and it took this time that was already going to be just a confusing, awful time. If you remember that first week of the pandemic, but in addition to all that, I also had this false accusation that I couldn't disprove, and but I didn't do it. I didn't. But how do you prove it? And it was just this like awful thing. Again, I can't get into the details because I don't want to embarrass the person,
No.
but it was a really awful week where they were accusing me of this thing. And then by the next Monday, they came across information that they realized they were wrong. They had just been told something, they believed it, that the information was completely false. And so they apologized. I accepted the apology. We moved on. But man, that week It was something that was really, if you're essentially accused of lying, and that can really tear at the fabric of a relationship. And it was something that was threatening to destroy this relationship with this person I cared about very much. So that was something that just stayed in my head. The false accusation, what it was like to live under the duress of a false accusation. And I think I started writing this book in 2023. As usual, you let a few years go by and things marinate in your head. But when I finally turned to, okay, I want to write a next book, I really wanted to explore that thing very specifically, the false accusation and what it was like for the person who was falsely accused.
Wow, it is so good. I I hate to tell people just read it. Just read it. I We can't tell you too much more because you will be surprised. You
You can
will,
tell people that, Patsy. It's okay. They
yeah,
trust
just,
you. Just
yeah,
read it.
no, exactly. That's what I want to get to. Just read it because when I say it's great, I knew it the minute I it just and it flows. Your writing is so good. It's November, and a lot of my radio listeners and also some of my YouTube viewers are doing NaNoWriMo,
Mm,
and they're always asking me for advice or what they should do because they're just starting off. They're people who are just starting off, and some are young, but many, like I have a 64-year-old woman. She's
mm.
been waiting all her life. She's just retired. Over the years, I've told people go back, listen to some of my interviews and what books I like, what authors I recommend. And I know that for me, you are always at the top of the list. I was looking at the some of the blurbs on your came out with this book. You have Lee Child there, and he was complimenting you. It was a different book, but his basic thing is that you're just so good. You're just so very good. You're at the
Thank you,
top of your
Patsy. And
game.
I
I
and I
think.
hope if that 64-year-old woman is listening, I hope she knows this. And this is one of my favorite things about what we do about this writing game is I always say that if your dream is to be shortstop of the New York Yankees, you pretty much know by the age of 18 whether it might or might not happen to you. But if your dream is to be an author, there's no end date on that. And I have known people who, yeah, it's been dormant in their mind for decades and decades of their life. And suddenly, whether it's they have the time, they have the voice, they have whatever it is that clicks into place in their 50s and their 60s and their 70s, even in their 80s. And that's just one of the things I really love most about this thing that we do is I really believe there is a story, probably more than one story in all of us, but it bubbles up at different times of the life. And it seems to come around at the right time, I think, for everyone. So that 64-year-old woman, heck, she might just be young and barely starting out in her author career. We don't know.
Yes, because look at Mary Higgins Clark was 89 when she brought out her last book, and she was on my program, and we were so excited still at that age. The oldest guest that I have had on Joy on Paper, the radio program, was Eugenia Lovett West, and she came on for her 100th birthday.
Wow.
100th.
Yeah.
She had
And
just
Mary
written a
Higgins Clark.
book. She had just written a book about cybercrime. At the
Oh,
age
wow.
of 98, she
Right.
started researching because a friend of hers was ripped off by a scam, and she wanted to investigate it. She had written books before, but then she cybercrime. When you're at 98 and you start doing research into cybercrime and can write a really great book, it's just wonderful. The life of an author. It's so exciting what you can do.
And Mary Higgins Clark is actually one of my heroes and has been for a long time. And I'm sure her backstory, but for those who don't, she's really inspirational. And when I say I think of Mary Higgins Clark on hard days, I really do, because she was, I think, 39 years old when her husband passed away suddenly, and it left her with four children to raise by herself. She had a full-time job, and she used to get up at 4 o'clock every morning and write at the typewriter at her kitchen table until 6 o'clock when it was then time to get the kids ready for school, get herself ready for work, and she would go off and work a full day. And I always think to myself, if Mary Higgins Clark is tough enough to do that, okay, I can handle writing this book too. So she's always been somebody I talk about. And yes, and maybe she'll continue to be an inspiration as I write, as I advance in age, because I know she was still writing terrific novels well into her 80s. She's absolutely one of my heroes.
Absolutely, and with you and the whole mystery thriller, that background. Now, I don't remember, I haven't counted how many books you've written. As I said, I remember some of them so clearly, And Closer Than You Know is one that will come back to my mind. First of all, how many books do you have now?
Yes, The Boundaries We Cross is number 12, which only puts me, what, about 50 behind Mary Higgins Clark? I'm catching up, slowly but surely.
Yeah, well, you got a lot of years in you. So,
True.
exactly. Now, let's go back because, as I said, a lot of my listeners are doing NaNoWriMo and they're coming thinking about when their first book will get published. What was your first book, and what do you remember about the when you got that when you got it published?
So it was called I'm sorry, The Boundaries We Cross is this one. It was called Faces of the Gone, and it came out in 2009. And it's such a roller coaster of emotions. There's so much pride in seeing something that was just an idea and just a manuscript on my laptop suddenly become a book. So there were a lot of great moments about it. But then there were also a lot of moments of humility. Like I can remember, you think to yourself that when your first book comes out, that you've reached the mountaintop, right? Like I have achieved this great thing. This is amazing. And then suddenly it comes out and you walk into Barnes and Noble on the first day it comes out and you say, I am Brad Parks, I am an author, and I am here to sign my book for you. You may bow down now. And you discover they don't have copies of your book. That Barnes and Noble, in fact, had only ordered about 300 copies, and they're all sitting in a warehouse in Nevada, most of them for online sales. And so you realize you think you're at the mountaintop, but really you're at the base camp. And there is this long slog toward respectability, toward people finding your work, toward becoming established. So it was, yeah, it was this kind of eye opening experience of you have these ideas about what's going to happen when your first book comes out. And they then meet up with the very hard reality of the book selling universe, which is not everybody is Lee Child and not everybody is Mary Higgins Clark. The rest of us have to just get in there and keep slogging away and keep writing books and hope that people notice.
I think they have been and they will be because you are just so talented. And that is this is such an exceptional way that you write. It's I think when I'm reading your books, I think I told you that with which another one of your books. I said definitely Closer Than I saw that as a movie in my head. And that's what happens. This one, oh gee, all right. I love this because I can just see it being shot. I spent a lot of time when I lived in England. I spent a lot of time either in Eton. I live not too far from Eton, and I'd walk around there all the time, and also in Oxford. That's where I bought most of my books. I came back from Europe. I had 3,000 books in a 20-foot container. But most of them were bought either in old bookstores in Eton or in Oxford. And I love that atmosphere. I would just love to see this book made into a film.
The rights are still available if you or anybody else would like to buy them. Call my agent.
I think somebody will. This is just too delicious. It's it is like a dessert almost. It's when a book is so much fun to read and you get this story, you get this excitement. I call it delicious. I think it's delicious. We know there's bad things going on sometimes, but on the other hand, the story reads so well.
Thank you, Patsy. It really heartens me that you enjoyed it that much. I loved writing the thing, and there were definitely times writing the thing where I'm sitting there biting my fingers down to the quick because I don't write from an outline. I'm the kind of writer who really doesn't know what's going to happen next. And there were times when, man, I had Charles in the worst way, and I'd be thinking, all right, how am I going to get him out of this? So if you had those same thoughts while you were reading it, you and I were very much on the same page, I assure you.
This is what's so great. It's just so great about writing when they take over, your characters take
Yeah.
over. Isn't that a wonderful feeling?
Yeah, it is, and I've learned to trust that over the years, and it's still funny to me, all these years and all these books later, when I am writing a scene and it's not working, and I know it's not working, right? I've written enough books that it's this is nails on chalkboard. It's not working. Why is that? Inevitably, Patsy, it's because I'm not listening to the character, and I am making them do something they don't want to do. But when I actually start listening to the character and following them, and my characters are real people to me. I can close my eyes, I can see them, I can hear their voices. And when I start being true to them, the story flows. And that's always just a it sounds kooky as heck. I know when you
I,
say it, but it's also this form of magic where you and I've heard authors say this, and I think before I was a fiction author, I just dismissed it. But you really almost feel like you are channeling these characters and you are their medium and they are speaking through you. And when you are doing that's actually when you're doing the best writing you can possibly do. So that's the space I try to get myself in.
definitely, that is the moment when they take over.
Right.
And I've been writing a book forever. I don't know if I'll ever. It's just, it's 120,000 pages. Just editing that thing is going to go get me crazy. But my characters are so real to me. My main character is a British lawyer. And sometimes I think at 5 in the morning when I sit down at the computer with my first cup of coffee, he's sitting in the corner and saying, like, why are you ignoring me? Get back to my book. Isn't that fun?
Come on now, Patsy, let's go. This case isn't going to solve itself. Move along
Oh,
now.
oh, you're good. You're good. You love accents. I was going to
Well,
say
I do.
that's.
Well, and it's a funny thing because I will actually I read parts of my book out loud, and I because I always want to make sure that, particularly with dialogue, that it sounds like the person. There's the lawyer character in this book, The Boundaries We Cross. Jerry Cordova is his name, and I made Jerry Cordova from the Bronx. So I know exactly how he talks in my head. And every time I have the character talking on page, I got to make sure, hey, wait, does he sound like Jerry Cordova? Because he sure as heck won't sound like a barrister from England, right? So you just want to always make sure that the characters are being true to themselves. And hopefully that then allows them to leap from my tiny little brain into your brain and become the fully fleshed human being whose saga you are then inhaling, which is the point.
That's great. The South Maine one. If you try that too long, I their throat must hurt.
Yeah, I can't do the Maine accent without I sound too much like a New England blue blood when I try to do the Maine accent. So I can't get that one right. But I would still try when I was being Robbie Bliss. I would attempt to drop the I's and say Charles dear and whatnot. And yeah, as you can tell, I don't do it very well. But yeah, that keeping that character voice is just it's so pivotal.
Were you an actor?
Actually, in my current life, I do a little bit of very semi-professional acting, like community theater. I think I got paid all of $600 for my last role, but I do enjoy being on stage. And there actually are parallels between that and writing novels, at least for me, because in both places, you constantly have your antenna up and you're constantly thinking about audience. Am I reaching the audience? Am I entertaining the audience? And sometimes it's obviously a lot easier when you're on stage because the audience is right in front of you, but I'm always thinking in that same way when I'm writing a novel is if I had my audience right in front of me right now, would they be entertained? And
Well,
that's the
I think
goal anyway,
that's great.
Patsy.
I love community theater. My kids were involved in community theater. My husband actually got on stage too. One day they were short of somebody in Fiddler on the Roof, Village
Okay.
Women, and for some crazy reason, some people at the time said maybe he was drunk. He said, Patsy, we need one more person. You join the dancers in the village scene. I wasn't a dancer and I had never been on the stage. I was not exactly great, but I was the most enthusiastic. Once you get out on stage, isn't it wonderful feeling?
I love it. I love it. Absolutely. Being in front of an audience and connecting with them. And it's always those like 2.5 hours, 2 hours, whatever it is, where you are just completely absorbed in that world. You're not thinking about anything else. You have to be in the moment. You have to be responding to your fellow actors on stage. You have to be thinking about the dialogue. You have to be, and I love that escape. And I should state very clearly that I've also known there's a reason I write books for a living, and it's because I'm not that good an actor or a singer or anything else. I'm not one of these community theater people who thinks that Broadway missed out horribly on me or something like that. Like I know I belong exactly where I am, which is community theater. That's right my level, but man, I enjoy it. And hopefully you're putting on a good product and you're entertaining people, and yeah, it's a marvelous escape for me from the rest of life, and I enjoy it. As a matter of fact, I'm going to be in another show coming up soon called The Spitfire Grill. at a little community theater here in California. I'm looking forward to
And I think it's great when it comes to dialogue, when you have this
that. Right.
understanding of the voice and how to use your voice. And obviously, you've gotten that idea. So I was really happy. I wanted to show, I always like to show people a few blurbs because, or a few other things. Just when people watch, whether they watch on YouTube or whether they listen on the radio, I want them to remember you. I want them to know about you. And I just wanted to let people know that Brad Parks is an international best-selling author and the only writer to have won the Seamus, the Nero, and the Lefty Awards, three of crime's fiction most prestigious prizes. So, do you, when you won your first prize, you remember that?
Yeah, it's a wonderful feeling because it is this that I always say that awards are meaningless beauty pageants until you win one, in which case they are the most important thing in the world, right? But the reality is it's very flattering and it's wonderful to have that vindication that all those hours at the keyboard were not in vain and that somebody has recognized your toil. At the same time, I'll place the Seamus Award next to the keyboard and I'll say, "Hey, could you type for me today because I'm not feeling like writing?" And that award never types a single word for me. You also realize that it was a lovely to go to the banquet and get the award, and your publisher's very pleased and your agent's very pleased, but then you have to get back to work. So I guess I've always kept things in perspective for sure.
So, you've had just a wonderful time since you started writing. It's not always easy to start, and you have all these problems finding an agent, getting it published. But meanwhile, also when once you are even at your point in writing, you still have an editor that you work with, right?
Oh yeah, sure. And my agent, Alice Martell, is really actually my first professional editor. And she very much earns her 15% because she gives some wonderfully sharp criticism and constructive, of course. And I know if she likes it, she's tough. So if she likes it, I'm on the right path for sure. Yeah, the only thing otherwise, Patsy, that's hard about writing is the beginning, middle, and end. But other than that, it's
Uh,
just a piece of cake.
yeah,
It's really quite simple.
exactly, exactly. I'm so happy that you were on Joy on Paper Live. I just started this about 6 months ago, and it's so much fun that I can now see people and get to do this and help promote books because we need more readers. We need people who are going to read books, and I want to encourage them. And that's why I like to show a little bit extra just so that people will remember you. If they see this cover, they'll know I like it. It's got a little bit of spookiness as we're looking through those letters and we see the school there. We know something's going on. We know something's going on. And here's your website, right?
Yep, yep. And Patsy, I really I appreciate your enthusiasm for books, and it's always great to be on with you. It's always great to talk books with you, and I certainly am very appreciative of your highly generous spirit. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been a joy to talk to you. And thank you so much. I know it's going to be a big hit because it's a wonderful book and it deserves to be. So, again, Brad Parks, and his website is Brad Parks Books. And the book is available online, wherever books are sold. And now I'm sure that the Barnes and Noble and all the other places have your books, and because you are doing so well. It's
Thank you, Patsy.
fantastic.
Great
Okay.
chatting with you again.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining me. Bye bye now.
Take care.
Okay. Bye bye. Oh my goodness. It is so much fun. Really, I get such a kick out of this. I've talked to him on the radio, and of course, I've loved his books for a long time. And it's just so much fun to be able to do this YouTube and be able to see all of the authors that I love and all the authors who I think you will love. Check out Brad Park's new book and then go back, and all of his books are great. So please subscribe to Joy on Paper Live. Subscribe, share, and comment. And thank you for joining me today. Bye bye now.